The Awakening of the Consciousness. Chapter 8. Life Flavor, Work Flavor. In our attempt to be in self-remembering, a phenomena takes place similar to a battle, a combat, between sleep and awakening, between the states of sleep and vigil, and the state of self-consciousness. When a person decides to perform the exercises in order to awaken his consciousness, he realizes that at first the states of self-consciousness are not only very intermittent but also last very little. By performing the practice of the key of soul, we succeed in provoking, little by little, states of self-remembering. But as it is only natural, we fall back into sleep again and again. When the person remembers himself after having been asleep and realizes that for a significant period of time he was living with the consciousness absent in a state of identification with the things of life outside and inside, sleeping, psychologically speaking, he then feels something similar to when he wakes up from his nightly rest, from the sleep of the physical body at night. The person realizes that before having that flash of awakening, he was asleep, and when a person realizes that he is asleep, he has taken the first great step towards his own awakening. A person who believes and is convinced that he is awake cannot wake up. In this battle that is established in the person who begins these psychological works, there is an immense sequence of triumphs and failures, of states of sleep and of self-remembering, of self-consciousness, that are following one another intermittently. In the same way that an athlete through hard training achieves various feats in the practice of his athletic discipline, the aspirant of awakening achieves feats in his discipline of self-remembering. Little by little, the time of duration in which one is consciousness increases. The frequency with which one is conscious increases, and also the amplitude and penetration of what we are conscious of increases. Little by little, we start having more moments of self-remembering of the third stage of consciousness. But that battle between sleep and awakening continues to happen. It is the battle between light and darkness, between darkness and light, that is symbolized perfectly in the white and black tiles of the floors of the temples of mysteries of all serpentine cultures in the history of humanity. When the person is asleep, identified with the events of exterior life and with his own interior psychological reactions, he is found in a state that in esotericism is called life flavor, which is what we have in routine life. When the person decides to perform the spiritual work of self-knowledge through self-observation, self-remembering, transformation of impressions, profound internal meditation in order to know and eliminate the ego, then one experiences the work flavor. Life flavor is that flavor that the routine events of horizontal life have and is experienced when the person remains identified with all external and internal situations. Work flavor, on the other hand, requires a state of self-remembering and a total inversion of the attitude with which the circumstances of existence are normally taken. If a person is identified with the events of life, he cannot extract from them the elements that are needed for self-knowledge and the development of his essence. The Master Samael teaches us in this regard. The esoteric worker who returns to identification after having lost his guard once more feels the life flavor instead of the work flavor. This indicates that the psychological attitude, which was inverted, has returned to its state of identification. When you take the experiences of life as a means to an end, as a means to self-discovery, as a means to self-observation, you can taste them. The work flavor is something wonderful. It gives one an ineffable exquisiteness. When you discover that you have such and such a psychological defect and you eliminate it, then you come to taste the work. It is an unmistakable flavor. But when after you have worked, you abandon the work on yourself and take the experiences of life once more as before, that is, you re-invert the sense of experiences, then undoubtedly you will again feel the flavor of daily routine, the same life flavors as always. Here we have arrived at a neuralgic point, very important regarding to the theme of awakening, since a person who intends to do so, and who intends to enter the path of the razor's edge, the interior path, to become united with his internal being and achieve the intimate self-realization of the being, must understand very profoundly that all external and internal things, events, experiences, situations, internal psychological reactions, thoughts, feelings, etc., should be put at the service of our path and of our self-knowledge. When someone wants to awaken, he puts everything at the service of that awakening, the pleasant and the unpleasant, the important and the unimportant, the easy and the difficult, the sublime and ridiculous, the external and the internal, the mundane and the spiritual, the duties and the rights. Everything, absolutely everything, is useful for a person who wants to awaken. All the facts of life are useful in order to extract wisdom for the person who is determined to learn. That is why the Master Michael says in aphorism number 33, for the one who has the disposition to learn, each day and each event have wisdom for him to capture. That is why it is necessary to adopt what we are saying as a philosophy of life, that life is not an end, but a means to achieve awakening and self-knowledge through its experiences and thereafter establishing self-consciousness in order to be able to achieve the intimate self-realization of the being, until reaching the feet of the most beloved Father and further on. Become a Turiya with illuminated objective consciousness. The Hermetic Seal. Another tool that can help us in our attempt to awaken the consciousness is a psychological technique called the Hermetic Seal, because with it we propose to be sealed so as not to fall into identification and therefore avoid having the ego steal from us the energy we need for our awakening. With this opportunity, we will once again draw upon the teachings delivered by the avatar of Aquarius, the Master Samael Enveor. I apologize to the readers for transcribing teachings of the Master Samael and the Master Lakshmi, or other initiates and masters. But what really happens is that sometimes, when I wish to express an idea regarding a particular theme, there already exist teachings or opinions on that subject which exactly express what I want to transmit. And that is why there often appears textual transcribed teachings of our teachers. It is not our goal to write a book consisting of transcriptions or to make a collection of teachings about the awakening of the consciousness. Our objective, as we have already said, is to transmit our experiences and understandings about this theme, and based on the practice and empirical results that we have had in this existence, to share with our brothers and sisters of the path this small book which tries to transmit enthusiasm in order to renew the internal impulses to practice and practice and practice the techniques that allow us to truly awaken and not to dream that we are awakening. The Master Samael tells us regarding the Hermetic Seal. So then, there is a need for the Hermetic Seal. We must create a magical power in ourselves as a defense, which allow us not to let the mercury be extracted. It is possible to create such a defensive power if, in truth, my dear brothers, we do not become identified with all those trifles of the outside world. There is much we could say about the intimate remembering of ourselves. We become helpless in the conditions we are in. Anyone can play with us. We do what others want us to do, and that is absurd. Are we going to have an individuality of our own or not? Or are we going to continue as we are? Does it not seem to you lamentable that others play with us? You are found tranquil in your study, and someone calls you on the phone, insults you, and you become upset. That was not in the program, but you are upset. Why? Because someone else called you on the telephone and told you what they wanted. So then, where is the capacity for defense? We are completely helpless. Every time one becomes identified with the foolishness of humanity, the consciousness falls asleep. One becomes an automation. One must every morning seal oneself hermetically. I do nothing but what my being wants me to do, not what others want me to do. I will not become identified with anything in life. Because when someone becomes identified with something, he ends up being an automation. If you become identified with your own mind, with your own morbid thoughts, you end up adultering and fornicating. If one becomes identified disgracefully with his negative emotions, he ends up losing creative energy by the tons. If one becomes identified with words, like someone's gross and dirty words, he of course ends up speaking nonsense. We must seal ourselves, I repeat, every morning, and the seal must be constant. Do not become identified with anything other than the being. Do not forget your being, never ever. Never ever, never ever. Because the being is what counts. It is the fundamental. Thus, changing our behavior, sealing ourselves hermetically, we can work in the forge of the Cyclops, and by not losing creative energy, we will obviously envelop in an orderly fashion, one after another, the seven radicals. We need the seven radicals, we need the flaming power. If we want to disintegrate what must be disintegrated, and create what has to be created, there is much in us that must be annihilated. There is much that we must create within ourselves. Annihilate the ego that, unfortunately, is processed in the seven levels of the being, which is why liberation is so difficult. It is very rare, frightfully rare, to find someone who achieves the Buddhist annihilation and create the second body. To create it, the mercury must not be lost, and it is lost when one becomes identified with something, when one forgets oneself. But if one does not forget himself, it is accumulated and becomes the second body. And if one is always hermetically sealed, afterwards the third body emerges, then the fourth. Whoever comes to have the four bodies, physical, astral, mental, and causal, receives his animic and spiritual principles. Perfecting such vehicles is astonishingly difficult. It requires never forgetting oneself. A mystical stalking is required at every instant and every moment, not becoming identified with any negative thought, with any negative emotion, with what so and so said, with what so and so affirmed, with a neighbor's nonsense. It is necessary to seal ourselves hermetically in order not to lose energy. If we proceed thus, we will be able to convert the superior existential bodies of the being into vehicles of pure gold. But how difficult it is to perfect the superior existential bodies of the being! Very rare is the one who achieves it, because the way, unfortunately, everything in life works according to the law of the eternal Heptaparaparshinok, the law of seven, and the psychic aggregates are processed for that reason in the seven levels of the being. There are those who manage to annihilate their aggregates in one, in two, or three levels, but how rare is the one who has managed to annihilate his psychic aggregates in the seven levels of the being. But I give the key, the hermetic seal, that is the key of keys, and it is summarized in never forgetting ourselves, our own being, never becoming identified with any circumstance of the external world. It is obvious. So, tonight, when speaking in the intimate remembrance of ourselves. I insist again and again on the need for a hermetic seal, of a magic seal. Every morning when we get up, we must make a single resolution to remember ourselves during the whole day, to not forget, not even for a single moment, ourselves. This is called being sealed hermetically. If one does not proceed like this, if one does not know how to seal himself, he is a toy of the world, helpless, 100% vulnerable, a machine, an automation that everyone manages. Delve in these concepts, my dear brothers. We need you to form a real individuality. You still have not created an individuality. It is necessary to create it. For that, you need the hermetic and magic seal, daily, constantly. And if you work in the flaming forge of Vulcan, you must know that the superior existential bodies of the being demand the hermetic seal. Do not forget ourselves, because if you lose your energies, with what are you going to fabricate the bodies? How could you do it? This does not mean that you should not act. It is clear that you must. Sealing ourselves is learning to take advantage of the worst difficulties. In truth, the most serious inconveniences of life are a marvelous gymnasium for a Gnostic, but you have to know how to take advantage of it.